It happened that a strong monster attacked mankind, and to save people from his encroachments, the protagonist was going to pull out the holy sword, which had great power, with the help of which even the demon king could be killed. Except that this very sword was sticking out in the body of a beautiful blonde, neatly between her melons. This is an interesting and intriguing story about a guy who had the honor to save the world, only here is the way he chose to do it very unusual. But let's go back a few minutes. There was no idea what was going on in the city. All the inhabitants were trying to escape from the monster that was catching up with them. And it would seem the end was near, as a universally recognized hero appeared among the crowd. It brought hope to the hearts of the townspeople. Uriel looked spectacular and tried just as spectacularly to deliver a crushing blow to the monster, for everyone was looking at her and believing she could help them. Not always a sword can solve all problems, so she harnessed her hero power by throwing an electric fireball at her enemy. Even though she was fighting alone, she was doing pretty well so far, even though the monster wasn't defeated yet. Everyone in the state knew that there were people who had been blessed by the goddess herself and given unusual abilities, the hero's Sula, which helped them stand up to the Demon King's army, demons and monsters themselves. Also interesting was the fact that the hero power only awakened in girls, so only they could become full-fledged heroes. Meanwhile, Uriel has finished the fight and the monster has been defeated, after which the janitors must quickly clean up the square, for if they delay the process, the blood will dry up, and it will be difficult to get rid of it. Yachino Cherio quickly proceeded to perform this activity, yet in his mind were thoughts only of female charms, and how wonderful it would be to touch them. He thought that all the characters were very cute and ethereal creatures, so it was no surprise that they were chosen by God himself. But the one who stood out the most from the characters was Uriel. Her figure was ravishing, eye-catching, and stirred the imagination, while her face was delicate and spiritualized. More than anything else in the world, the guy wanted to take off the heroine's armor, get to her soft and supple body, and shake all the bulges. But these were only dreams, and work had to be done, and the new assignment was quite challenging, as Serio had to somehow climb the building and wash the monster's blood off the wall. To tell the truth, it was too high, and the guy tried to refuse, but the boss decided to persuade him, promising to let him touch her feminine charms if he coped with this part of the job. It was a great incentive. He didn't have to offer twice, he didn't even need a ladder, and in a minute he was on the wall of the building, and wielding the rag masterfully, for a greater oddball was hard to find. He realized at an early age that women's bodies are very beautiful and attract him, as well as evoke dirty, filthy thoughts and desires, for the satisfaction of which he is willing to go to great lengths. After a few minutes, he finished scrubbing the wall, but as soon as he looked at the square, he realized that his boss had tricked him and gone home. A shame, because he had never once in his life been seen playing horizontal games in bed with a girl. Colleagues thought that the guy has already learned his lesson and will not fall for the fairy tales of the boss, but they were wrong. Cherio got upset and stumbled and went flying down. It was bitter to realize that he would probably die without ever experiencing the delights of physical intimacy between a man and a woman. But there was no death. Moreover, something smelled very pleasant and appealing, and it didn't hurt at all. No wonder he wasn't in pain, and that he generally didn't die, because somehow magically, Uriel had caught him and held him in her arms like a princess. He shouldn't have worried about what had happened, because the girl was trying to save everyone she could and who needed her help, because she was a hero. Come to think of it, Uriel was even more beautiful up close, and more beautiful than any woman the young man had ever seen. But having done what she had to do, the girl got ready to leave. But Cario wanted to try and stop her, as he wanted to talk to her some more, and he also realized that they might not meet again. Partway through it, he was able to grab hold of her cloak, so he teleported with the girl to the beautiful Garden of Eden. The girl was shocked to say the least, as she hadn't expected someone to think of and do something like that. He just wanted to talk to her some more. No one before Cario could grab her by the edge of her clothes, for she was moving at a prohibitive speed. Did he really want to talk to her that badly? But the girl had no time to talk to someone she didn't understand, because she had to return to the heroic headquarters and report on the completion of the mission. Nevertheless, the young man was not going to retreat and wanted to talk to the girl about something, so he asked her what she was into. This question made her more angry, because it was not a date. The rejection didn't stop Cherio, and he asked why Uriel had decided to become a hero, what had influenced her decision. He knew full well that the girl, like many before her, had gotten her powers from the goddess, but still, he was curious to hear all from her. What thoughts were in her head then? Basically, Uriel became a hero, not because of her desire to save the world, but only because she got the hero power. She had no other reasons. But on the other hand, she had gotten this power for a reason. Day and night she had trained desperately, so she considered herself more than worthy to stand here and be who she was. Suddenly, Uriel wondered if the guy knew the story of the Holy Sword. Obviously he did, the story of the hero pulling the sword out of the stone. This is the story of how a young man defeated the demon king by drawing the holy sword from a stone. But it sounded like a fairy tale, because in reality there were no male heroes and there were no holy swords, but as a child these fairy tales sounded all too real. And also the girl, when she was a little girl, admired the strong and tough hero who protected the weak and fought evil. Now she wanted to be like that hero from the books, to protect people from all sorts of troubles, so she would do everything she could to achieve her goal. At this moment, Cheerio once again realized that the girl in front of him was extraordinary, magnificent, and unearthly. He liked her beautiful face, her pure and strong spirit, but really all his thoughts were circling around her large, feminine charms. Cheerio was grateful to the girl for finding a few minutes to talk to him despite being busy, so he would be even happier if she gave him an autograph. Except this autograph was definitely going to be unusual. The protagonist asked the girl to write her size and clearly not her feet, but he realized from her reaction that he had said too much and needed to smooth things over if he didn't want to get a painful blow to the head. So he quickly corrected himself and said that he just wanted an autograph. Besides, to tell the truth, everything else and the most interesting he could also determine by eye with millimeter accuracy. Yes, Uriel had signed the flyer, except this was the first time she had to sign a nude photo. But Cheerio wasn't particularly embarrassed by that fact. Only to reflect about it did not get long, because the guys noticed movement from the side of the city. There again appeared a huge monster and attacked the civilians. How this could happen, Uriel didn't understand. This monster should have been dead by her efforts, but it was more alive than ever. It was a hydra that shouldn't have recovered, but things didn't go according to plan. The girl regretted that she didn't have the strength to wipe it out. The problem was also that the monster had gotten much bigger, but the girl was going to rejoin the fight despite that. And the guy was asked to stay put and wait for the reinforcements she would call on the way to town. She, on the other hand, had no right to sit and wait for her boys on the spot, as the situation in the city was worse than ever. After a few minutes, Uriel arrived at the battlefield, and now she is ready to do her best to save people because she is also a hero. But suddenly she saw the monster's tail was about to hit a civilian, so she tried to push it away. The whole situation was out of control, and Uriel was almost out of strength. The monster was stronger, so her wounds were serious this time. People began to run away from the square, though. Up to this point, they had been standing and gawking at the hero's fight with the monster. Only Cheerio was not running away, but looking at the now defenseless girl. The young man realized that he wanted to help the hero who had saved his own life, but he was so scared that he couldn't even take a step towards her. Meanwhile, the monster was about to bite off the head of Uriel, who couldn't get to her feet and was ready to accept her fate. And the moment Cheerio saw all of this, he heard a voice asking him about whether or not he needed the power. And then a quite incredible phenomenon happened. Cheerio somehow magically moved into the world of the goddess, who heard his voice and desires. Now the boy had to make an important choice, either to run away shamefully, as many did, or to pull himself together and fight like the truest hero. In other words, the goddess suggested Cheerio to be the second male hero who appears whenever humanity is in danger. She was ready to grant him the power to fight monsters, with which the guy would be able to save the people of the city, as well as Uriel. Yes, Cheerio wanted to save Uriel since she had done so, but he wasn't quite willing to risk his life for others and didn't understand why the choice had fallen to him in the first place. The goddess ignored his question, saying that the male hero's strength lay in his ability to summon the holy sword. The main character could not believe that the holy sword is not a fairy tale, but the very real reality, and he can become the one about whom new legends will be written. Children's tales and legends said that the holy sword was sealed in stone, which meant it had to be found and pulled out according to the boy. That's the point that was just fiction. In fact, the male hero will have to perform one very interesting ritual in order to summon the holy sword. And it is the young man who needs by all means to give the female protagonist the greatest pleasure, in order for her world to explode with hundreds of lights. Only when the female hero reaches the highest point of physical pleasure, only then does the holy sword appear, but it's not any guy who has to do it to her, only the male hero. So, the holy sword is the essence of the female hero. To extract it, the guy needs to stimulate the roots of the girl's soul in order to develop her sexuality and give her pleasure, which at its peak will create the holy sword, which can be taken out and used for its intended purpose. Only now it was starting to dawn on the guy what he had to do to make the holy sword appear, and he didn't care what the smart way to call it all was. The goddess recognized that it was a special power and not everyone was suited to wield it, so it should go to the one who perverted the most in the world. So her choice fell on Cheerio. Now the guy had to decide whether he would get the holy sword and fight the monster, or try to escape without getting his superpower. After realizing what was going on, Cheerio made a definite decision. He was ready to fight all the possible forces of evil, if he got such superpowers, and he would have a legal opportunity to do all sorts of obscenities with girls. In the same second, the goddess moved the guy to the square and he was next to Uriel, Moreover, he managed to put up a protective dome, and now the monster couldn't harm them. This barrier had a few special properties. The first was that the monster couldn't get beyond it. The second, it increased the sensitivity in girls. And the third was that no one could see what was going on inside. The goddess then turned to Uriel and warned her that the guy would touch her body in different places and in different ways until she was plunged into a world of bliss. Then he could get the power to defeat this monster. Cherio tried to do his part as well, saying that once the girl was as good as possible, the holy sword would appear. So they needed to get to the most interesting part and not waste any time. The girl hesitated, but the barrier was acting on her more and more strongly, and her body began to burn under her armor. It was a strange and unexpected discovery. But it would be extremely wrong to act without the girl's consent. So Kirio once again asked her permission to bring her to the peak of pleasure and explode a small firework inside her, in order to gain power and kill the monster. Truth be told, Uriel didn't like all that weird and twisted stuff, but if it was the only way to defeat the monster and save people, she was willing to let him touch her. To this end, she stripped off her own extra clothes and ordered the lad to do whatever was necessary for the just cause. He was a fool to think that the armor only slightly hid her charms. The girl's body was far more beautiful than he had assumed. So without hesitation, he began to knead her poured perks. Cherio was going crazy. His longtime dream had become a reality. The girl's body under his fingers was melting with pleasure. She was screaming, so sharp were the sensations. She was already feeling so good that embarrassment and shame evaporated, and she asked the guy to be more active. He himself was drowning in the new sensations and working his hands more and more actively. Suddenly, the girl's body began to glow, and the guy realized that he had to wait just a little longer for the holy sword to appear. And the moment the fireworks inside the girl exploded, the holy sword appeared. She asked Cherio to be delicate while pulling out the item. But as soon as the boy drew his sword, the barrier that hid them from human eyes shattered. People looked at their sweet couple, and the monster tensed. Uriel now realized that the holy sword was real, and the protagonist held it in his hands as well as her exhausted body. It was also surprising that Cario's appearance had changed, and he acted like a gentleman, even inquiring about her well-being. There was no time to find out what was going on, as the monster was rapidly approaching them, and they had to fight back, or better to destroy it once and for all. For the first time in his life, the guy did not feel fear in the face of mortal danger. He was confident that he would win. Such a thing was not peculiar to him. The fight didn't last long. A few swings of the sword, a few clear blows, and the enemy was completely defeated. That's the power of the legendary weapon. Watching what was happening, the girl also realized that her own strength had also increased several times. She could feel the power of the sacred sword within her. Meanwhile, Cario landed near Uriel. He wasn't so much thinking about the fight with the monster as he was thinking about what had happened earlier, and promised the girl to take full responsibility for touching her body a few minutes ago. But before that, he would quickly finish the job here by activating the special skills of the sacred sword, because the monster was still fluttering, even though it shouldn't be anymore. On this last strike, it was possible to put an end to it. The monster shattered into small pieces. Everyone around did not expect it to be defeated by a male hero. Now, Cario himself was happy with his life, because his superpower opened the door to the most perverted affairs, because he could do things he only fantasized about in the bathroom, for the sake of the holy sword's summoning with the hero girls. In the meantime, the 6th squad of guards had arrived to help Uriel and Serio, but the monster was already dead, so they were late. Lilia, Saran, and Rosemary didn't understand how a guy could be a hero, and how he was able to defeat the Hydra. Wasn't their sweet Uriel able to handle everything herself? It was a mess, of course, so the girls called the young man to join them. This was what Cherio needed. Now he could become the second male hero in history, and there would always be a sea of beautiful girls around him. After the fight ended with the monster, the girls took the protagonist with them. Now they were all together headed to the headquarters of the heroes. They were closely watched by the citizens of the city, being puzzled how among the girls was a young man. Lilia could not think that among the heroes could be a young man, because up to this point never happened. This girl was considered one of the key members of the 6th squad, and it seemed her heroic power was in controlling the wind, which was why they were now moving so quickly from point A to point B, and her parameters were quite impressive. Another girl carried Uriel on her back as she thought she was too injured and needed to rest, even though the heroine claimed to be able to move on her own. Meanwhile, Saran grabbed the protagonist's hand, as she thought it was strange that she was the only one who hadn't been holding on to anyone all this time. After a while, all the heroes of Squad 6 arrived at their destination and could relax a bit. Cherio instantly appreciated the beauty of the main building of the heroes' headquarters, as it was a huge mansion. But the most interesting thing was that, while he was lying on the ground, he managed to peek a little bit under Lilia's skirt. The girl turned her attention to it and teased him a little, as she thought the guy was very much interested in seeing her underwear. He didn't even deny the fact that he was insanely eager to see the girl's underwear. He even got a nosebleed, which caused a wave of resentment from Uriel. Meanwhile, the young man realized that an incredible luck fell to his share, since if he joined the heroes, he would sleep under one roof with incredible beauties. After that, the whole group gathered in Rosemary's office. The girl realized that for the first time in a very long time there was a male hero, which meant that a crisis for humanity had arrived. Even more amazing was the fact that Cherio's main ability was that he could summon the holy sword that was in the heroine's body, and then use it to fight the dark forces. Uriel had to admit that the young man seemed invulnerable and looked really tough while fighting the Hydra, and Lilia began to tease her colleague because she definitely fell in love with the guy, although the blonde began to passionately deny it, saying that such statements heard only from the townspeople, and she herself does not think so. This altercation would have gone on for quite a while longer, but Saran was tormented by one question: how Kirio summons the Holy Sword. The young man was ready to tell everything about the smallest details, but noticed that his new acquaintance was too embarrassed to tell about what had happened, so she asked to slow down a little and talk about all the details that interested the girls a little later. Meanwhile, Rosemary had come to the conclusion that Uriel recognized Cherio as his equal because the squad leader had never personally seen a male hero before, but it seems he does have heroic strength, and there's no arguing with that. This was great news because the main character's plan was to become a member of the 6th Squad and fight alongside the girls as a real hero from the legends. Only the problem was that the young man realized that he could not answer the truth about why he wanted to become a hero, because girls are unlikely to understand his desire to engage in all sorts of obscenities with them for the sake of saving humanity. The squad leader couldn't brush over his thoughts, but she reminded the guy that heroes risk their lives to protect ordinary people, and that was the main reason why each of them fought different spawns of darkness. The young man didn't know what to say to that, but he was saved from the uncomfortable question by Saran, who noticed some not-so-good approach to the office and the city in general. It was definitely an enemy invasion, and several dragons, goblins, orcs, and other monsters were trying to break into the hero's residence. This was the first time Kirio had seen such a demon horde, but the worst part was that they were all controlled by someone or something. Judging by the number of demons, then the Demon King's army should have been behind all of this, no less. However, Rosemary did not want the protagonist to get involved in this battle. After all, he was not yet part of the Guardian Heroes, and she would not send him into battle at her own risk. Plus, she realized that in battle, any weak resolve could be the deciding factor between life and death. Plus, Uriel also had to hang around because of her wounds. Nevertheless, Lilia, Soren, and Rosemary rushed forward as they were the ones who had to do everything to sort out the problem. The first to enter the battle was Lilia. She used her heroic power by summoning Blizzard Pussycat, and this was surprising, for many people thought that her heroic power was to control the wind, but this was actually far from true. Her main ability was Snowstorm, and now she was going to have fun killing demons. The second Saran entered the battle, she used the Desolate Phantom Puppet technique. It looked equally mesmerizing. Serio couldn't take his eyes off the girl's actions, but asked her to be careful. Nevertheless, Uriel asked the guy not to treat Saran like a child. After all, she would be above him in rank anyway, since she was now the deputy leader of the squad. Meanwhile, the guy and the girl were almost attacked by one of the demons, but they were protected by Rosemary. While not even using heroic strength, she chopped the enemy to pieces with her sword. On the demons rose every minute more and more, and Lily suggested the protagonist to call the Holy Sword, and with his help to finish off the uninvited guests. And this sentence seemed a bit, though, intriguing to Cherio, but dangerous. Nevertheless, the girl wanted him to use her to summon the Holy Sword. She was so curious to know how it all really happened. Both Rosemary and Lily were determined to participate in the summoning of the Holy Sword, and the protagonist had to quickly tell them how to do it, causing their disbelief and bewilderment. So, the Holy Sword is the essence of the heroine. The guy needed to stimulate the girl's soul, and when she reaches the peak of pleasure, the sword will form and appear to the world. This, of course, was quite shocking news, and now Lilia was not so sure what to do, and was very embarrassed to ask if she could have a moment to think about it. Meanwhile, Saran and Rosemary began to have problems as the demons started copying the hero's movements, and it became increasingly difficult to hold the defenses. In the current situation, one had to set aside shame and other emotions in order to do the right thing, namely summoning the Holy Sword. Lilia was ready for it. As soon as the girl was under the effect of the sacred barrier, she was pierced by a wild excitement that she had never felt before. She couldn't believe that trivial clothes rubbing against her tender skin made her body so sensitive the strength to stand on her feet was gone, and the girl fell to her knees. Now, Cario explained to the heroine that this barrier increases her sensitivity and will help her reach the peak of pleasure. Besides, no one will see what happens inside the barrier. At this point, it came to Lilia's attention that the main reason why the guy wanted to be a hero was because he wanted to keep doing all those naughty things with other hero girls. It looked both funny and sad. for it was the first time she had seen someone who fights for such a ridiculous reason. Heroes can't do something like that with an unformed motivation. However, she thought the guy could still be a hero, albeit for such a ridiculous reason, but he had risked his life for it, which seemed pretty impressive. The girl didn't pull anymore. She undressed and was ready to have some good fun with the male hero and see what his heroic strength was all about. Cheerio didn't need a special offer. He immediately pounced on the girl and started kneading her feminine charms. Truth be told, Lilia had never experienced anything like this in her life. It was such a vivid and incredible emotion. The protagonist also enjoyed the process. Plus, he liked the new pose much better, as the view was more interesting. The young man contemplated the figure of the girl who was practically sitting on him, realizing that she was perfect. Slim waist, lush perches, taut stomach. But it happened that the girl at some point fell on her side from an overabundance of emotions. Cheerio even thought that he was too rude and apologized to the heroine for his actions. But in fact, it was the best moment of her life, and very much enjoyed, so Lilia did not think long, kissed the main character, not knowing that it was his first kiss. But the guy's kiss was not enough, so he continued to actively touch, crumple, and in every possible way fondle the girl's perches, who felt the approach of the very fireworks inside. Definitely, the girl came first to the finish line, and at that moment, her body lit up, which meant that the holy sword was going to appear in a second. The protagonist no longer had time to hesitate. He had to quickly draw his sword, as a crowd of monsters were rushing to his side, ready to attack them. No more than a second passed, and an explosion went off, hiding behind the smoke Lilia, who had not yet fully recovered from her experience, and Cheerio, who had gotten his dose of sweetness. Only there was nothing to worry about, as Cheerio drew his sword and prepared to fight back against his enemies using the new sword technique of Squall Panther. It turned out that the holy sword was customized to the female heroine's features and powers, so Lilia liked the sword the guy was holding, and asked him to wipe out all the demons from the face of the earth. And after another moment, the guy created a huge swirl of ice, perfectly aware and recognizing the reason why he wanted to be a hero. He killed demons, and voiced without hesitation that he wanted to be a hero, and was willing to risk his own life just to be able to do all sorts of naughty things with female heroines. Uriel asks Rosemary to accept this strange guy into their ranks, even though he has some pretty dirty motives, but regardless, he's someone humanity needs right now. Besides, looking at the way he was fighting now, and fighting an opponent who was much bigger and more dangerous than him, it was clear that this guy was not going to fight at half strength. Meanwhile, one of the representatives of the Demon King army was watching the fight, who had sent all those demons to the hero's residence. He was extremely interested in Cheerio. Quite quickly, Cheerio dealt with the enemies. The sword disappeared and all the girls approached him. Rosemary informed the guy that she would turn a blind eye to his odd behavior and rather immodest desires, as long as he would give his best in the fight against evil. But it wasn't all that easy and simple, though Uriel was sure the guy shouldn't have any trouble passing the exams. Everyone in the kingdom knew that the Guardian Heroes were created by 10 people, each sworn to protect the world from monsters and the invasion of the Demon King's army, each of the pride of the people. Only that to become one of the Heroes Guards had to pass the entrance exam, in other words, to pass the selection. And if Cheerio fails, then do not see him as his ear's different obscenities and female charms. And no one was going to make an exception for the guy. He had to pass the test, because it didn't matter how strong he was. If he didn't pass the test, he couldn't become part of their squad. The only thing Rosemary could do for the guy was to organize this very exam, which Kana, a member of the 7th Squad of Heroes, volunteered to check. All of this was to take place in the arena, where a crowd of spectators had gathered who didn't believe that Cheerio had heroic powers after all. A boy, not a girl. To top it all off, all these people were heroes, and they would witness either the guy's victory or his defeat. Plus, he was distracted again, now by the pleasant feminine scents that were wafting around. But it won't be that simple, and the 2 leaders of the hero strangers won't let the guy cheat. The exam will be practical in nature. If Cheerio can defeat 5 magic golems of varying difficulty in 15 minutes, it will mean that he has passed the exam. But since the peculiarity of the guy's hero power is unusual, he will be accompanied by another hero in the arena to activate it. Once Cheerio's hero power is activated, his assistant is no longer allowed to interfere in the battle, and will have to stay in a strictly designated area. After a short bickering, Uriel was to be Cheerio's assistant at the exam. The boy dreamed of touching her again, while the girl hoped that everything would go well, because no one would have to see anything behind the barrier. Except that when the presenter announced the start of the exam, instead of starting to take out the holy sword, the guy ran from Uriel in the opposite direction. It was strange to watch his movements, as everyone could see that he was just running away for now and not doing anything else. Maybe he had a plan, but it was unlikely. The problem was that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't even take a step closer to Uriel. It felt like they were two of the same polarity of a magnet, so they weren't attracted to each other. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get near the girl. His whole body resisted it, so he ran away from her towards the golems again. The fact that he couldn't get near Uriel was making Cherio slowly lose his temper, but the host was loving what was happening in the arena, as if she was the one who set it all up. Meanwhile, the guy was starting to realize he was getting to the point where a huge magical golem blocked his path. Obviously, he was going to avoid chatting with him on distracted topics. And then there was a very obvious and expected development of events. The magic golem hit the main character with all its might, and the presenter was teasing the audience, saying that this guy has nothing to oppose the opponent. Until that moment, Cario didn't realize that being a hero wasn't easy, that combat could bring a hell of a lot of pain because the holy sword made him practically invincible, and he easily defeated his opponents. At one point, the young man began to doubt himself and whether he could become a hero, but then he heard Uriel's voice. She was ordering him to come to her, activate his power, and show what he was capable of. Except his body didn't want to move, it ached a lot, which suggested he was too weak physically to be a hero. The next moment, Uriel realized that she needed to act more decisively, so she pulled off her top blouse, exposing her beautiful body to the protagonist, after which she made him a very provocative offer, which was that if the young man now coped with the exam on excellent, he could take a bath with her. It was worth it for the main character to hear this proposal. Then he sharply had the strength to resist the incomprehensible repulsive force. He was ready to go to great lengths to make such a fantasy come true. As hard as it was for him, he was rapidly approaching Uriel, but she asked him to speed up as the new magical golem was preparing to hit him. As soon as Cario got close to the girl, the holy zone was activated, which was unusually strong, and Golem, no matter how hard he tried, could not break through it. The first part was finished. Now it was time to move on to the second, namely the summoning of the holy sword. Uriel was pleased with the young man's efforts, and a little amazed at how twisted he was, for not everyone could be empowered to fight by such fantasies. Meanwhile, golems from all sides were trying to break through the barrier, but they were failing, nor were the spectators able to get a glimpse of what was going on inside. And after a few languid minutes of waiting, the protagonist appeared in the arena, summoning the holy sword and preparing for another attack. None of the heroes present could understand the extraordinary power this young man possessed, nor what happened beyond the walls of the barrier. Even the captains were intrigued. Cario and Uriel were alone in the barrier a few minutes before the extravaganza. The girl was curious about what the guy had done last time with her friend Lilia, how their sword summoning had gone. The young man admitted without hesitation that he had fondled the woman's charms to us, and they had also kissed passionately at one point. It was quite entertaining and informative information, so the heroine, not thinking long, decided to take the initiative and kiss the young man first. The kiss wasn't a bad one, but it didn't last long. Plus, she wasn't quite sure if she was as good a kisser as her friend. Moreover, the girl confessed that she too wanted to taste everything that was happening to Lilia and Cario back then, when they were attacked by the demon horde. Plus now, they had to determine how to most effectively summon the holy sword, after which she kissed the guy again. But this kiss was more passionate, more sensual. She pressed against him with her whole heated body, and the young man realized that today the girl became more active than last time. The initiative came exclusively from her. Uriel tried to understand her feelings, for when she had seen Cario summon the holy sword with Lilia, she had felt a prick of inexplicable jealousy. In general, the girl also understood that the young man usually looks happy, but when the time comes, he changes not only externally, but also internally, becomes more serious and resolute, and it could not but bribe. It was also hard to deny that this young man had a tremendous effect on her. Just a few kisses and touches were enough for her to explode into a small fireworks display, reaching the point of ultimate pleasure. Now, after everything happened to them for the second time, Cherio drew his holy sword and was ready to fight the golems, though he looked too weak before. Now his aura had changed drastically, though many people didn't realize how much yet. But what was even more amazing was that with a single blow, the protagonist was able to chop into two equal parts one of the golems that attacked him, causing a storm of emotion among the observers. He didn't stop there, and the moment two more golems approached him, the guy chopped them down as well. Now the observers were completely delighted with what was happening, although on the other hand, a little could not believe their eyes because the guy was unusually strong and was able to kill 3 golems at once. There were only 2 left. But the commentator was out of hand and definitely didn't like this sort of thing. Though the girl couldn't help but acknowledge the obvious fact that the guy was killing the golems one by one, though it looked like he was close to defeat just a few minutes ago, but had now turned the situation in his favor. In no time at all, he had killed almost all the golems, only one remained, and the protagonist attacked it, intending to finish this examination with dinner. Only this time, something went wrong, and even with the help of the Holy Sword, he was unable to break through the opponent's defense, which only meant that it was a golem of the highest rank. Namely, it was a level 5 golem, the biggest obstacle before entering the hero's guards. Because of him, many passing the entrance exam knocked out. It was indeed a big problem, but Lilia thought that since this sword could shoot a powerful beam, there was a good chance for Kirio to win. But the problem was that the guy couldn't use his most powerful attack right now. Since this arena was filled to capacity with people, no matter where the guy might have shot, he would still have hit the crowd and there would have been no casualties. And this was one of the big problems on the way to becoming a young man hero. Now he was only able to dodge the golem's blows, but he did not dare to counterattack. At some point, something definitely went wrong, and the golem abruptly switched from the protagonist to Uriel, who was as defenseless as possible at the moment. The crowd screamed in fright. No one expected that this monster, created especially for the exam, would decide to attack the assistant. Everyone was so stunned that they didn't even try to stop him. But the collision of the girl and the paw of the monster did not happen, as she was covered by the main character, blocking the blow. Cherio was more determined than ever to protect the girl, and with her his innermost desire, which was directly related to her promise. After which, using the Holy Sword, the protagonist sent this huge golem into the air. Many thought that it was a stupid act, as falling golem will still crush the protagonist, but for some reason the guy did not even move from his seat, not showing any concern about it. But at that moment, Rosemary realized that the guy wasn't doing it all easily, since the only direction he could shoot the beam was just the air. And then there was the most extraordinary phenomenon that only the gathered heroines could see. The guy shot a beam of holy wing at the golem, splitting it into small pebbles. It was hard not to recognize that this was an unqualified victory, which meant that the protagonist had passed his entrance exam. But not everyone was happy that Kirio had passed the heroic exam. One of them was Dianela, who looked at him with undisguised hatred. However, she couldn't openly express her hatred towards him in front of the staunch spectators, so she admitted that she was greatly impressed by his actions, for he started attacking furiously after summoning his sword, and even defended his assistant, and his last attack was outstanding. Therefore, the leaders of the 2nd and 7th squad, Dianela and Mamelio, recognized Kirio as the first male hero in history, and sent him to the 6th squad to serve his country. Meanwhile, the host of this event, after its end in the corridor, caught up with Rosemary, who could not help but clarify a few points. For example, she was well aware that this girl interfered with the entrance of the exam. Her hero power magnetic conductor gives living things the ability to magnetize, allowing them to attract or repel, so it was hard not to notice that the girl was using this ability to keep Kirio away from Uriel. In general, to interfere in this match was a brave act, but Rosemary could not understand why her colleague went for it. What was her main motive? The girl thought that Cherio was a dirty boy, and the heroines couldn't let him join their ranks because if they did, the hero's value would drop, and he had gotten his powers by mistake and had no right to join the 6th squad. In general, the girl was jealous because she wanted to be in the same squad with the beautiful Uriel, but not in this stupid 7th squad. But she did not know that behind her back is the captain. Mamelio didn't think long and tied up her ward, dragging her behind her for a preventative talk, while apologizing to Rosemary for the inappropriate behavior of one of her team members. Meanwhile, at the Squad 6 residence, the girls prepared a cake for Cherio to celebrate him joining their team. Rosemary also informed him that the room the guy was temporarily living in was now officially his. He could decorate it as he pleased, only he had to warn the girls in advance what he wanted to bring into their home. Lilia had promised to come to Kirio's room and play when he was done setting everything up there. Saran didn't particularly like it, but overall she didn't mind. As soon as the boy heard this sentence, his nose bled, for his mind was filled with interesting pictures again, even though he claimed his motives were crystal clear. Meanwhile, the dinner and welcome party was over, and the guy was sitting in the shared bathroom waiting for Uriel, who had promised to take a bath with him, to arrive. Soon the girl crossed the threshold of the bathroom. She was wearing a single towel and a cute blush played on her cheeks, but she was still willing to do it because she had given her word to the guy that she would take a bath with him if he passed the exam. It was definitely a great gift, as the towel hid almost nothing, and Kirio was once again convinced that Uriel's body was beautiful, his gaze darting from her long legs to her wide hips to her sickly pouty perches. The girl was embarrassed that the guy was looking at her so intently, so she asked him to turn away and then she would wash his back, except that he had already imprinted her bright image in his memory. By and large, Uriel recognized that Kirio was an extraordinary guy, as he was able to defeat a Hydra, then a whole horde of demons. But the protagonist believed that without the holy swords, he wouldn't have succeeded. Because in truth, all these times he had just borrowed Uriel and Lilia's power for a while in order to defeat his enemies. He definitely wouldn't have been able to do it without them. It was all understandable and interesting, but suddenly the conversation took a different direction. The girl asked the guy to watch his words and address her informally. After all, they were friends. But he found that hard to believe, so he couldn't switch to informal socializing so quickly. After all, she was his oldest, even though the girl insisted they were real friends. Nevertheless, the young man was happy because he succeeded, and he became a hero, despite the obstacles, which meant that ahead of him awaited a sea of different vicious adventures. Meanwhile, in the demon realm, the queen was listening to a report from her subordinates, who reported that a rather strong male hero had been spotted during the attack on the headquarters of the 6th Hero Squad. Anisa realized that they needed to root out the abomination in the form of a male hero, while they had the strength to do so. At this very moment, it was morning in the human world. Sario woke up in his new room. He had another wet dream, but the reality was much better as he woke up next to a half-naked Lilia. It seemed to the girl that the guy was either scared or overly surprised, as she could hear every beat of his loud heart. This was all just new to the protagonist as he woke up for the first time in his life, next to a girl with hardly any clothes on, but the guy needed to pull himself together as it was time for them to get up. At this rate, Hario was indeed late, for which he got a reprimand from Uriel, as she was worried about him and the fact that today was the guy's first heroic mission. The uniform definitely suited him, except that he needed to be more collected. Even though he apologized for being late, there was still a residue. Rosemary enlightened the young man that he would go on the mission with Saran, and since it was his first job as a real hero, he would only have to support the girl as much as he could. The guy also needs to improve his physical strength and stamina scores so he can be on the spot in time where their help is needed. There's no way to get anywhere without it. But since he was still a beginner and hadn't reached the right level and time was of the essence, Saran applied her skill, created a few clones of herself, picked up the guy in her arms, and went on a mission. After a while, they found themselves in a clearing in the forest where a hybrid spider monster had caught several youngsters in its strong nets, clearly though it wanted to eat them. So it happened that a small settlement was attacked by the spider monster Arachne. He kidnapped some children and killed all the adults who wanted to free the children. Saran was going to single-handedly defeat, or rather kill this monster. Cherio would have to guard the perimeter in the meantime. It was understandable, but the guy couldn't understand why the monster only took the children. Everything here was just plain and simple. These children should become the spider's lunch, but before that, he wanted to enjoy their cries and fear longer. So he wrapped them in the web tighter and tighter. This shocked the young man. He could expect a lot, but when confronted, he was scared. So Saran asked him to pull himself together, or else they would fail the mission. In general, the girl believed that in the work of the hero does not need emotions such as fear, passion, or anything else. Everything should be evaluated with a cold head, only so you can create a perfect plan and resolve the situation with minimal losses. So it was time to get down to destroying the monster and freeing the children. So Saran multiplied 100 more times to overwhelm the enemy in numbers. The protagonist was mesmerized watching what was happening in the clearing from his hiding place. He realized that it was all very different from what had happened before. However, she had already inflicted many serious wounds on the spider monster and was confident that she would now kill her opponent and the fight would be over. Only at one point things didn't go according to her well-thought-out plan, but she had enough reaction to bounce aside and avoid being trapped by the monster. It was obvious that the monster had created some sort of armor for itself out of spider threads and now actively began to attack the heroine, and she had to dodge until it came up with a new plan. Cherio began to panic. He did not understand what to do in such a situation because their opponent was now much more active and stronger and now took an attacking position. But the girl did not lose her coolness and determination, so she asked the young man to stay calm. It was what they needed now. Soren understood more than anyone else that emotions and distractions had to remain minimal to successfully rescue the victims and get through such a difficult mission. So she picked herself up again and decided to go on a counterattack. To do so, she activated another technique, as a consequence of which she stratified her sword and ran forward. This attack brought Saran victory. She killed the monster and freed all the children who were perfectly fine and uninjured, so a happy smile spread on her face. At the moment when the girl began to communicate with children, she changed a lot, and the main character could not help but notice it. Thought that she was very nice because most of the time she looks cold and aloof, but radically changes when she talks and comforts children. Such words embarrassed the girl. Nevertheless, she was able to find the strength to thank the young man, who asserted for the 100th time that it wasn't just her smile. She was a very delicate and sweet girl herself. After a little chatting with the girl, the children switched to the main character. They were curious to know what kind of superpower he had, because he was the only male hero in their world. But as soon as Kirio tried to explain to the child what kind of power he had, Saran interrupted him at half a word because children don't need to know such things. And then something happened that Saran couldn't foresee. And while chatting with the children and the main character, she didn't notice how the magic circle, which had been drawn on the clearing beforehand, was activated, so now the power that was released was too great, and it was simply impossible to stand on one's feet. But the problem was that not only the girl and the guy were caught by the power of the magic circle that sucked them inside, but also the children who were sucked in after them. In order to save the innocent children, Saran activated her skill and pushed them away, telling them to run far away and not to worry about her and the young man. He should be fine. They will get through their mission. After a few moments, Saran and Serio sucked the magic circle into themselves, then began to disappear in front of the startled children. They sat staring fearfully at one point, not knowing whether to stay in this place or run away. But at some point, one of them realized that they should run as far away as possible and led the others with him. Meanwhile, the protagonist and the girl woke up in an incomprehensible place. But it was good to know that they were at least awake. Their arms and legs were in place. And in general, they were not bothered by anything. Saran, unlike the protagonist, realized that this was a space created by magic. In other words, a special technique used by demons, which meant that they were trapped by them. But the problem wasn't just that they had fallen into a demon trap, but that the girl's techniques didn't work here, which meant that this trap was the work of an elite, either warlord or the demon king himself. Nevertheless, Saran had not given up hope of trying to bring about a positive outcome and break down the walls of their unexpected dungeon. The protagonist wanted to try to help the girl, but she asked him to stay away and not interfere, because she was going to deal with everything on her own and did not need his help. Saran was now worried that this was all her fault, because after the mission she had let her guard down, even though she should have been responsible for herself because of Cherio and the children she had saved. But she hadn't. She had stumbled, and if this continued, the other girls in the squad would be disappointed in her. She worried about throwing it away again for lack of use. They wouldn't need it, and the truest hatred would settle in their hearts for not being able to live up to their hopes. Saran definitely didn't want to go through such a nightmare again, so by any means necessary, she wanted to get a positive result and do something to get out of this trap. But no matter how hard she tried, no matter how much effort she put into new attacks, everything was useless. The walls remained in place, and it was impossible to break them. So the girl began to lose faith in herself, realizing that her actions were meaningless and useless. At this point, the main character came up behind the girl and put his arm around her shoulders, expressing to her his admiration for her actions and her strength, as well as the endurance and tenacity with which she tried to free them from captivity. By and large, she easily defeated the monster, was able to save the children quickly, and even now was trying so hard that she almost fell off her feet. Seeing all this, the guy realized that he had a desire to help her. Still, the main character was her comrade in arms and the first male hero in their country. He had super strength too, and the girl could put her trust in him as her big brother who was always ready to come to the rescue. At this point, Saran realized that perhaps the only solution to this situation would be to call upon her sacred sword, much to the surprise of the protagonist. However, Cherio realized that the girl in front of him was still quite young, so he decided to show his best side by saying that they didn't have to do something like that. They could come up with some other plan to solve the problem that had arisen. Except that Saran had no more ideas left, so all hope was only on the protagonist, to whom the girl pressed herself with her whole body. And he had nothing else to do but activate the holy zone to get down to the sweet stuff. And when they found themselves surrounded by this barrier, the young man once again realized that the girl he had just tenderly embraced was a super cutie that was impossible to look away from. This barrier worked on every girl that was inside it. Saran was no exception. She snuggled up to the young man, looked at him with big, innocent eyes, put her arms around him, and melted with innocent strokes on his head, asking him not to stop. Suddenly, the girl realized that she was beginning to experience a completely uncharted spectrum of emotions, something that had never happened to her before. And then something happened that the girl did not expect. She reached the highest point of pleasure, and her body lit up with a pleasant, gentle glow, which meant that the holy sword was about to appear. There was no time to waste. The protagonist realized that now he had to pull the holy sword from the girl's body, but as soon as he did, he realized that the object in his hands was too short. Not like Lilia's or Uriel's. Saran's holy sword was an echo of her own power, and if there was a main blade in the main character's hands, there were hundreds of similar blades flying around. That was just what was needed. The young man thanked the girl for her help and honor. Now he decided to take matters into his own hands, for it was time for them to get out of this worthless trap. The protagonist undertook the mission entrusted to him with full responsibility and determination, creating many holy balls, namely more than 1,000, preparing them for counterattack. Saran looked at Kirio and realized that this guy was incredible, for he could control each of those blades freely, and each blow he delivered against the walls of their dungeon was incredibly powerful. This moment, the girl noticed that the first hole had appeared in the wall. This despite the fact that no matter how hard she tried before, no matter how much effort she put in, she couldn't leave even a small scratch on the walls of their cage. And at the moment when the protagonist thought that if he tried a little more, they could leave this place, the wall changed its shape. It started to look like a real living cellular tissue. Now, Saran began to construct a train of thought, realizing that most likely their dungeon was inside a living monster, and the magical circle that had sucked them in had brought them to such an unusual place. It seemed unbelievable, but a fact. Meanwhile, the young man realized that he couldn't stop and kept trying to attack the walls of the trap, but he was failing as the tentacles wouldn't let him concentrate on his attack and hindered him in every way possible. And just when it looked like things might end badly for him, Saran entered the fray, blocking the tentacle's strike, preventing it from harming the young man. The girl was doing this for a reason, for while she would cover the young man, he should concentrate on attacking, and by any means necessary to destroy the wall of their cage. Since she believed in Kirio, so she asked him to reciprocate, that is, to believe that she could protect him. It was what was needed, the girl defending the protagonist from the tentacle attacks, while he concentrated and aimed his charged holy swords at the walls of their dungeon. Truth be told, when the girl first saw the main character, she thought he was a hopeless and unbelievable pervert who couldn't be trusted or relied on. But now she was admitting she was wrong. Yes, he was still a pervert, but through it all, he was someone who could support, protect, and instill faith like a true big brother. And now, concentrating, he created 1,000 swords again and activated the 1,000 swords continuous attack series skill. It looked fantastic and unrealistic. At some point it worked, the cage collapsed and the guy and the girl were free, but a little bit did not foresee that they would fall from a great height downwards. The guy and girl were very lucky that they hadn't broken anything, as the trees had cushioned their fall from the height, and now they were lying side by side on the ground, looking into each other's eyes. Saran quickly sat down, smiled embarrassedly, and said that Cherio was a very cool guy today, and showed his best behavior. She didn't even expect this. They sat across from each other for a while longer and argued over who was cooler today until they heard someone approaching them.